Okay, greetings. In this short little mini video, we're going to talk about how to write SMART goals. So you guys are all going to have to submit drafts of some SMART goals for the lesson plan that you're going to write towards the end of the class. So I figured I'd give you all a little background on what a SMART goal is and how to write one. There should be some resources in Canvas also to help you during this process. There's a document explaining the process, and there's some various representations of Bloom's taxonomy and some links to the Virginia SOLs. So let's go ahead and get started talking about SMART goals. Now, SMART goals stands for all of these different qualities. So we have specific, measurable, attainable, reasonable, and timely. And so we'll go through these one by one and talk about what they mean and how we can achieve them in the objectives that we write. So when we say a specific objective, what are we talking about? Typically, they need to pinpoint specific skills. We're not looking for you to create really general capabilities or things that would be very difficult to measure. So a good example would be a very vague objective would be something like understand the Romantic period era of literature. So that's pretty vague. There's a lot of things going on there. There's not really a good way for the student to demonstrate that. So we're going to need to pinpoint more specific skills. If we said, produce a 10-page paper on the Romantic era, that would be a little bit more specific. So it's also about defining what success will look like when the student's done. If they're going to achieve this objective, what should it look like when they've completed it? SMART goals also need to be measurable. They need to be observable behaviors. So if we go back to that last example that I gave, the bad example, understand the Romantic period, how would you measure someone's understanding? I think that overall that's a very hard thing to do. We could argue that we could give them a test, and if they did well on it, they understood the material, but there's all of other sorts of factors that could go in there. So what this is asking you to do is to pick behaviors that are very measurable. So, for example, when I said produce a something, you know that eventually they need to follow some sort of conventions and produce a product. That is their observable behavior. They're going to produce something for me that I can then take and grade based on a scale later. So it's about choosing very observable and specific behaviors, and this is where picking specific action verbs that are targeted at each different level of the Bloom's taxonomy. So we have things that are mostly knowledge or comprehension based. So that would be something like define or identify. So those two things are typical test items. So define something, short answer question. Identify something, a multiple choice, choose from a list, something like that. But there are also verbs that go along with thinking processes that are higher up on Bloom's taxonomy. So when we talk about somebody creating something, evaluating something, synthesizing something, doing something more complex like that, it's even more imperative to pick very specific action verbs so that you make sure that on some level you can measure their progress towards these learning goals. Now, the next two are sort of interchangeable. We'll talk about attainable first. And basically this one is, are they realistic goals? I mean, is this even in the realm of possibility for the group of or the population that you're working with? I mean, are you asking 8-year-olds to read Shakespeare out loud, something that even high schoolers, somebody who's 16, 17 might struggle with? Is this a realistic goal for this population? Reasonable. So this, as I said before, kind of goes hand in hand with attainable. Are they within the intellectual proximity of the students? Is this something that with a reasonable amount of work and a reasonable amount of effort that somebody could actually attain? And the last one is timely. So this is something that's pretty important. But the way that we're going to structure our objectives, or at least the way that I'm going to recommend that you structure them, should take care of a little bit of this. But how long should it take to achieve the objective? So again, we need to put some sort of stop date on how long we're trying to achieve this objective. And when we look at an example in a second, it'll be kind of apparent. So let's take a look at an example. So a good SMART goal, and this isn't a particularly great SMART goal, it's pretty boring, but it'll demonstrate some things for you. By the end of this lesson, you'll be able to define form class words to a degree of 85%. So up here, typically your objectives are going to begin with this, and a lot of times the format that you'll see is by the end of this lesson, by the end of this module, by the end of this unit, ... and then you have a bulleted list of 3 or 4 different things that you're looking for. So this is going to be our timely. It's going to tell us how long it should take to achieve this. So by the end of this 90-minute lesson, you should be able to do this. And now let's go down and let's continue and look at the different parts of this objective. So you'll be able to define, again, an observable verb, not one that's very high up on the taxonomy, but nonetheless, it's very observable. We can measure this. I could give you a number of different, very easy, although boring assessments to observe this behavior from you. So again, here we have something very specific. You're not going to be able to define grammar, because again, that's a huge, not very specific concept. I've got a really specific piece of content that I'm asking them to define, and then here I specify a degree. Now, this, for a lot of people, it's good to have this in mind, because again, we want to be able to do this somehow. A lot of people will omit this from the objective, and it will be, implicit within the structure of your educational experience what degree you need to achieve. I mean, if you need to achieve a C in the class to pass it and to make it count for credit, that's an obvious degree that the school is really mandating that you maintain. So a lot of times this will be omitted, but again, make sure that somehow, even if you're talking about doing something that's a little more creative and they're going to produce you a product or create their own visual representation of a concept, something that's a little bit more outside of the box, that you give them criteria that will make it measurable. So if this has to be, just think about it, if it's not something that can be observed in this way where I can give you a right or wrong test on it, then you need to have some sort of rubric to justify how you're scoring on those different things. So again, those are SMART goals. Go ahead, take a look at the other resources that are in Canvas, and let me know if you have any questions.